When did you realize this doesn't even seem like it's from this planet?
Every single thing about the craft and the way they operated didn't make any sense to us. This is technology that doesn't even exist.
Bob Lazar, a scientist who worked at a secret government base, Area 51, was recruited to back engineer alien crafts.
I was replacing somebody. I think there was some horrific accident.
Where someone died, or?
Yeah, where somebody died. The amount of power we're dealing with is astronomical.
So you're going into this craft, and what are you thinking when you're inside of it?
It's a very ominous feeling because it's a really weird looking thing.
What do you think this was designed for?
I'd say something close to half my height. There were guys that were following me around, and I started getting a little concerned, going, well, are they booting me out of the project? They're not just going to let me hang out at home and go get a new job knowing what I know.
What is your life like from that moment on? Is that where everything changes?
The excitement kind of turned to dread.
I first heard your story decades ago. I told you last night we went out to dinner. I've seen pretty much every interview you've ever given. I've followed the story incredibly closely. Mm-hmm. But for people who don't know the story, let's give them the bullet points. You used to work at Area 51. In Area 51, you went like, huh?
Well, we want to be accurate.
Okay.
Area S4.
S4, okay.
It's about 15 miles south of Area 51.
Okay.
But,
you worked in, how would you describe it?
I guess within the Area 51 compound. You can call that a subset of Area 51.
And you got that job. Before that, you were working...
Before that, I had worked at Los Alamos
right.
National Labs in New Mexico.
And you were involved in what kind of work?
Nuclear weapon development, physics. I mean, they do everything there.
So how do they approach you to say, hey, Bob, why don't you come on out to the Nevada desert?
Well, the way this went down was, at that time, it was 1982, I had put... a jet engine in my Honda, and Los Alamos put it on the front page of the paper. It said, Los Alamos man, physicist at the lab, built this 200 mile an hour, Honda jet car that I drove to work every day. So I was known in Los Alamos, the guy with the weird car, and you could hear it from a mile away. Anyway. The day that came out on the front page of the paper was the day Edward Teller, the father of the hydrogen bomb, was giving a lecture down there at the lab. And we didn't have much going on that day in our group, and I asked if I could go down there. And I went down there early, and Ed Teller was outside, leaning on a brick wall there and reading the front page of the paper. Now, this is a guy out of history, so I introduced myself. Hey, I'm the guy you're reading about there. And we talked for a little while, and it was cool. Fast forward to years later, I had moved out to Las Vegas and had, left Los Alamos and, went on to other things. And I wanted to get back into the scientific community. I left to start other businesses and that sort of thing. So I sent resumes out, and one of them went out to Ed Teller and referenced our meeting. Back in the day. And anyway, he remembered me and gave me a reference, somebody to contact at EG&G. And that's pretty much how it started.
So you get a phone call or a letter? Like, what do you get?
Well, I got what did I get? I got a letter initially and went down for an interview probably a couple times, and it was down at EG&G Special Projects, which was at McCarran Airport at that time out in Las Vegas.
And did they give you any sort of job description of what you were applying for?
They said it was for... I can't remember exactly what they did. This was a long time ago, but I think it was advanced propulsion or something like that. Something relatively generic, and they said it's in a remote area. It's going to be some days on, some days off, and it was kind of not exactly a full-time job, but you might have to be out there for 2 weeks at a time and take 2 weeks off. So it was kind of the work schedule would be kind of broken up.
And did this seem attractive to you, or did it seem weird? How was
No,
it?
it really wasn't weird because people that work at the test site, anybody that's familiar with the area up there, working at the nuclear test site or at the Tonopah test range north of there, that's typically how things go.
So you had known about it from the scientific community? Because the Area 51 at that time was
No, they didn't say
still
anything about Area
classified.
51.
Okay, so
They just said it was in a remote location, and you just know it was up at the test site.
right.
So, but there was no mention of Area 51 at that time.
So they've done hundreds of nuclear tests in Nevada. That whole area there's giant chunks of Nevada that people.
Yeah, there's a big piece of Nevada, and it's split up into different areas. There's a nuclear test site. There's Area 51. There's the Tonopah test range north of that. There's little sub-areas. There's areas where they test chemical weapons and things like that. So it's all broken up as a gigantic test area.
So take me back to first day on the job. You accept a job. They take you out there.
Yeah, it's the first day, really, I didn't really get to see a whole lot. The first day was essentially just paperwork. That's when I flew into Area 51 proper. And I left McCarran Airport and flew what they call the Janet flights. Just, a passenger plane from Las Vegas to Area 51. And it was really just going through a mountain of paperwork that day. From security clearances to... it was like 2 or 3 hours of just solid paperwork, and that was really an uneventful first day.
When did things get weird? When did you realize? Like, at what point in time did you say, "Hey, this is not normal work. Like, this doesn't even seem like it's from this planet"?
That I can't tell you what day that occurred on because so much time has gone by. The days have kind of fused into one, and I can't separate the days.
Was it a slow burn, or was there a moment of recognition?
Well, the first inkling I had was when I came in. There's this facility that is at S4. It's in the side of a mountain, and normally we had pulled in with the bus and gone around the front through a normal double door. This time that I went in, there were hangar doors open. I went in through the hangar door, and in the hangar door was the disc, the flying saucer that I worked on. I saw it sitting there, and we walked by it. It had a little American flag stuck on the side, and I thought, oh my God, this finally explains all the flying saucer stories. This is just an advanced fighter, and this is fucking hilarious.
Right.
So I went by, I slid my hand alongside it. I got reprimanded immediately for touching the thing. And there was a guy, an armed guard, that followed us in and just said, keep your eyes forward and your hands at your side and just walk in the door. So that was the first time I had seen anything that was weird. It was sometime later that I was introduced to my lab partner, Barry. And we had some of the subcomponents of the craft in the lab. And Barry was very anxious to get a new lab partner. So he was very talkative and couldn't wait to show me different things. And it was in the demonstration of the reactor working where it caught my attention to where this is technology that doesn't even exist. So, I mean, that was the first time I knew that this is really something different.
What was it? What was it? What was it about this reactor that made you think that it didn't exist? Technologically.
Well, it was I actually have to back up because there were some briefings that I read before that certainly gave me the impression that this was going to be a weird job, but this was the first hands-on thing. This was a small reactor about the size of a hemisphere, about the size of a basketball, on a metal plate, and when it was running, it produced a gravitational field of its own. Now, this is something that we can't do. We can't produce any gravity. The only way we get gravity is from large quantities of mass. But there's no machine we can have that turns on that makes gravity. Like, you can turn on an electromagnet and it makes a magnetic field. We can't make a gravitational field. Anyway, this device was producing that. And Barry said, almost like he was bragging, go ahead, try and touch the sphere. And I couldn't. It pushed my hands away, just like two like poles of a magnet. So that was
So like when you take two magnets and you try to press them together and they
Yeah, you
push
have
against
that-
each other?
that kind of cushion feeling, but you can't get them together. The closer you put them, the more they push. But
And you felt that physically
with
with your
my hand. Yeah. Now there's nothing that does that, and that immediately caught my attention. Going, wow, this is something else.
What was your thought? Like when you felt that and you knew that there was nothing that you were aware of that could produce
Then
this?
that connected me to the briefings that I read on the first day at S4 was that everything that I had read was apparently accurate.
What were you reading?
It was kind of an overview. This project was to back engineer the alien craft, and specifically it was to try and back engineer and see if we can duplicate the technology with available materials. Now, to do this, they split the project into many different pieces for several reasons. They do this on all classified projects, so nobody has the complete story, but they compartmentalize everything. Now, we had the power and propulsion system. So what the briefings they gave me were like a 1 or 2 page overview of some of the other projects that were going on, on the craft. The only reason they do that is just in case what you're working on is connected intimately in some way that we don't know of to one of the other projects. You have to know their their existence. So again, they have everything from metallurgy to weapon potential of the craft, and these were all essentially very short briefings, but mine was just power and propulsion, and it made it very clear that what I read was accurate.
So when you were reading that, before you actually saw the reactor, what were your thoughts on what they were describing? If you knew that something like that didn't exist, and they're describing it in the briefings, what did you think you were going to see?
I didn't know at the time. I mean, I was reading, I thought, is this some kind of test?
See if you're crazy?
Well, not to see if I'm crazy, a lot of times they'll take in real high security jobs. I mean, they'll intentionally insert nonsense into them, whether it's to confuse the fact or if for someone was to leak it out, they would carry that information along and know where it came from. So I read through the documents, but, I didn't know if this was, part of some kind of test or,
Right.
Or what, or was it potentially realistic? I mean, I really didn't consider it being all that possible as far as being the actual thing that I was going to work on at the time.
How did they turn it on?
The reactor?
Yeah.
The reactor can be turned on or turned off in a lot of different ways. The way Barry showed me, the hemisphere is removed. There's a small tower in the middle. When you put the hemisphere on, the reactor activates. The reactor shuts down. It's load sensing. So if there's no load on the reactor at all, it shuts down. When there's a load present on it, it starts up again.
Load meaning?
You can consider it an electrical load. So although it doesn't necessarily operate electrically, there's no wiring that connects any of the subcomponents together whatsoever. They just have to be in the immediate vicinity. The stuff is borderline magic, and that's essentially where we left it, when I left the project.
So there was no progress made?
There was some progress. I mean, we did identify, at least we think, some processes and had a rough idea, we think, of what was going on, but I think this is a problem that they've had for a long time. And, I was replacing somebody that Barry worked with prior to me, and I think there was some horrific accident that I didn't have a whole lot of information on, but, Barry alluded to that.
A horrific accident, like where someone died, or?
Yeah, where somebody died.
Because they were trying to tamper with things or figure out how something worked?
Yeah, the reactor in particular.
But yet he let you touch it.
Yeah, I think what they were trying to do was cut into one.
Oh,
now,
Jesus.
they had more than one there, and that was supposedly there was an unannounced nuclear test, and that's what it was. At the time, remember, they were still doing underground nuclear tests at the test site. But from what I understand, according to Barry, there was an attempt made. Now, this must have been a pretty desperate attempt because it's not a very scientific process to analyze something that way. But it looked like they used a plasma cutter or something like that to cut into an operating reactor.
How many of these things did they have?
They had nine craft altogether. I only got hands-on with one of them, so I can't really say how the others operated.
Did you see the other ones?
Yeah. At one time, and only one time, the bay doors that between the hangars were all open, and I could see all the way through.
And were they all exactly the same?
No, they were all different.
Different shapes?
Yeah.
But they were all from somewhere else?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, did anyone make any attempt to explain or to tell you where they came from?
No one is the least bit interested in letting everybody know all the facts. They want to give you the minimum information that's necessary to complete your task. So you're not getting the story of where they came from. You're not getting the story of how much progress other people are making. You just focus on the small component.
But they gave you some indication that they've been working on these for a while?
Yeah.
When do you think they acquired these?
I really couldn't say. I think they've been around for a while.
So they bring you into this room. You see this reactor working. You realize this is nothing that, as far as like the scientific community at current time, has the ability to create.
We still don't.
What is your life like from that moment on? Is that where everything changes? Because I would imagine the moment you actually make contact with something that's extraterrestrial, whether it's an object or a being, something where you can actually absolutely be certain it's not from here, your whole paradigm, the whole world you live in, is now a different place.
Well, this is the only time it became exciting. The rest of the time, it was really an ominous feeling being at work. But at that time, it was exciting. I mean, now I knew we were on the absolute beyond the cutting edge of science. And I was so absolutely excited to be there every single time I was. This was a fantastic opportunity. And however, in short order, it began to concern me. We really have no idea what we're talking about. And the excitement kind of turned to dread at some point, because the amount of power we're dealing with is astronomical. I mean, to affect gravity, to produce the effects like this equipment does, takes huge amounts of power. And I've given the example before of, taking a small portable nuclear reactor and, putting it back into Victorian times, with the scientists of the time, and just dropping it in a room. And they come and look at it and see that it's producing power and wonder how it works. So they start taking it apart. And as soon as they get some of the shielding off, the people are going to drop dead because of the radiation inside. Now, the people have no idea that radiation even exists back then. But anybody that comes in to check on them will also drop dead. And, there's no reason that exact scenario couldn't happen with what we're dealing with. We have no idea how the physics operate within this thing. The power levels are, like I said, astronomical. Like, it's incredibly dangerous to tinker with something like that. And, in some respects, we were guinea pigs, just try to find out how to make this thing.
So they had a series, as far as you surmised, they had a series of different scientists try to back engineer this thing, try to figure out what this thing was, and they would bring in new people and let's throw Bob at it.
Yeah.
And they
I don't know how many, but I knew there was certainly one before me, and I knew he died during the analysis of the reactor itself.
And you don't know how many have worked on it, and no one gave
this
any
could have been
indication.
there for 50 years. It could have been there for 5 years.
When they're giving
really
you instructions, what are they saying? Like when they're giving you direction, they're showing you all this stuff. Like what are they saying? What specifically? What are they asking of you?
Well, essentially what they ask is what I said. We are just to gather as much information as possible, find out how it operates, and see if we can duplicate it. So,
But they never told you where it was from. They never let you ask questions about where it's from.
Well, if the information I read in the briefings was accurate, now what I do have to say is the information that pertained directly to the reactor was accurate. What I read did jive with reality.
In terms of how?
In terms of how it was made, what we saw, how it operated, the materials, how it, turned on, and what was discovered about it. I'm sorry, the migraine is really making it hard for me to think here.
Sorry, no, we talked that before the podcast. You tell our buddy Bob was getting a migraine. I know you're very stressed out by this, which is one of the reasons why I appreciate you doing this.
Where was I already?
We were talking about
right,
the way you explained it.
And so there was some paperwork that indicated that this was from the Zeta Reticuli star system. Now, how they obtained that, I haven't the slightest idea. But it wasn't just from the Zeta Reticuli star system. It was what they called ZR3. So it was a third planet in that star system. So there was no other information about it other than that's supposedly where the craft came from. Now, is that true? I don't know. I have no way of verifying that. But that was printed in the same materials that referenced the reactor. Now, I looked that stuff up when I went home. And Zeta Reticuli is a binary star, two stars that orbit one another. And it's only visible in the southern hemisphere, and it's about 30-some-odd light years away. So that's literally all the information I have about that. I don't know how they found out it came from there.
And you also probably have some suspicions that they give you some disinformation like you were talking about before. Where they would, if you ever decided to talk about this, they add in a bunch of nonsense to make whatever is factual look ridiculous.
Right. Or be able to trace it down. Like, hey, this fax came out and, this Lazar guy said it came from Zeta Reticuli, so they knew it would
when
be
you
me.
read Zeta Reticuli, were you like, what in the fuck is this?
Well, reading all of the stuff, it was, what
Right.
in the fuck is this?
You're like, why did I sign up for this? Like, what?
No, to me, this was cool. This was interesting. I said, I was just excited to be out in a secure area, in the middle of the desert. I said, this is awesome.
How old were you at the time?
I was in my 20s.
Yeah, so you're probably totally geeked out.
Oh yeah, this was great. I mean, I was excited. So I didn't care. I'm reading through everything, and
so you read through all the Zeta Reticuli thing, but then when you see the actual starship with the little American flag sticker on it,
well, was
that later or before?
That was before.
So before. So you see the thing before, and you say, "Oh, this is American."
Wait, what's that before?
So many years.
Yeah, I can't.
Either way, it doesn't matter.
The days have fused together. It's so hard to separate what happened in each visit to the place.
Do you remember the thought process when you read that it's from Zeta Reticuli?
Yeah, it didn't hit me like a ton of bricks or anything. It was just like, yeah, okay. And,
you think it was bullshit?
I don't know.
You just were like, okay.
Now I don't. I mean, because when I read it, I hadn't verified anything, and this was just a bunch of stuff I was reading, and I thought maybe after this they're just going to give me a test and see what I can remember in crazy information, and then it would. But like I said, when I finally went in with Barry and had hands-on experience with what they were talking about, it took on a completely different meaning.
So there's a plate, there's this thing that looks like a half a basketball, and when it's on, you can't come anywhere near it. You can't touch it.
Right.
What is gravity about that? Like the concept of gravity to most people is gravity is bringing something towards it.
Right. Well, I guess you would say it's anti-gravity. Mm-hmm. It's gravity shifted 180 degrees. It's, anti-gravity.
And did they have any understanding about what could possibly create this effect? Did they have any areas where they'd like you to look into?
No, they knew there was a fuel source in it, and they were proficient at making it work. And again, my analogy to something like this is you can drop a motorcycle off in the wagon train days and just leave it with the keys parked outside, somebody's place. Everybody will come around it, and they'll poke and prod, and eventually they'll turn the key, get it to start, and become proficient at riding it.
Yeah.
But they won't be able to understand what the hell's going on. They won't be able to make the plastic fender, much less anything else. And I think that's exactly the state we were at. We played around with the parts long enough before I got there where they could make the reactor operate, take the fuel out, and know that it makes it work. How exactly what was going on in the reactor remained a mystery at the time. I think we made some progress on what was going on inside, but I don't think anybody really knew anything. They could just watch what was going on and make note of it.
How long were you there?
I'd say about 6 months or so.
And what progress was made while you were there?
Well, we came up with a bunch of reasonably good ideas about how the reactor worked. And one of them was the square base of it was essentially like a cyclotron, which is a small particle accelerator, a circular one. Particle accelerators, linear particle accelerators, are just a, long tube essentially, and they accelerate particles with high voltage and, radio frequencies till they reach high speeds. But a cyclotron does that in a small circular area. And there's this very heavy element fuel, element 115, something that wasn't on our periodic charts at the time.
But it is now.
It is now, yeah.
When did it become on the periodic table now, the way the charts now?
I don't remember. Do you remember when they...
2004, Darmstadt, Germany, I think, is where they first fabricated 4 atoms. They lasted 220 milliseconds with the atoms. It's nothing, right? And then it later was discovered a couple more times they could fabricate it. Then they gave it a place then on the periodic chart after that, called it Moscovium.
So they told you about this stuff in 1982?
Yeah, well,
No,
we
not
kind of...
1982.
What year was this?
It was 88 and 89 when I was there.
Oh, okay.
82 is when
82 was
I
when
was
you
at
were at
Los Alamos.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The document, there's been detractors. There's been a bunch of people that called bullshit on many of the things that you've said, but over time, many of the things that you talked about, even in the 80s, have proven to be true. Things that people said were not true were proven to be true. Element 115 was one of them, right?
Right. Element 115, the fuel they had, was stable. In other words, it didn't decay. It wasn't emitting radioactivity. When they synthesized the 2 or 3 atoms of the 115, it did decay, and it was not a stable element. So they're kind of two different things, but I'm sure eventually they'll come up with a stable version. But it's the stable version that has the properties that we're talking about.
So they somehow or another had acquired a stable version. Did they say that the stable version had come with this craft?
Yeah, it absolutely came with the craft, yeah.
So at the time, you having a firm knowledge of the periodic chart and knowing what was real and what wasn't real, what was your reaction to having this stable element 115 that wasn't even supposed to exist?
Well, everything was impossible.
Right.
I mean, down to the metal. I did get a chance to look inside the craft on only one occasion, and this was important because where the reactor sat might have been critical to how it operated, since everything operates without any interconnection, so the placement of components might be critical.
So you're going into this craft, and what are you thinking when you're inside of it? Like, what are you seeing?
It's a very ominous feeling because there are no, first of all, everything is one color. It's like a dark pewter color, and there are no right angles anywhere. It's as if somebody took, I've said this before, somebody took a model and fashioned it out of wax and then heated it just for a short time so everything melted. Everything looks like it's fused together. Everything has a radius of curvature where 2 items meet. It's a really weird looking thing. There was almost nothing other than a small foldable hatchway that looked recognizable. Everything was really unworldly, to pick a way to describe it.
So you get inside this thing, and it's designed for something that's much smaller than a human being.
Yeah, you can't really stand up till you get to the very center of it.
And how tall are you?
I'm 5'10".
And what do you think this was designed for?
I'd say something close to half my height.
Wow. So these little 3-foot tallish creatures.
Yeah, and the seats were small too. I mean, obviously it was made, for something small. But there is no, there's nothing else in there. There's just seats, the reactor, and some of the subcomponents. There's no control panels. There's no bathroom. There's no decorative components or artwork or anything that you would recognize or trim. I mean, it's just a very bare bones thing.
You're not seeing any screens.
Well, there are archways around it that are part of the superstructure, and one of the archways can become transparent. When I was in there was another group working on one of the archways, and you could call that a screen, more or less.
So through that archway, it would maintain the solidity, the solid, whatever metal it was.
Yeah.
But you could see
through it. Yeah, it just
became
became transparent. Yeah. I saw that happen once or twice before I left.
Did you ask any questions about what the fuck that
No,
was?
there's no asking questions.
There's no asking questions.
No.
But when you watch something become transparent and you realize it's still there, but you can now see through it.
Yeah, I mean, now that's not that impressive. We do have some liquid crystal materials that are like that. They have
seen that in bathrooms.
smart glass. Yeah, they call it smart glass. So this is just, and I don't know if the craft is made of, an advanced metal or a ceramic. It was cold to the touch. So, I would lean more towards a metal.
You're not allowed to ask questions.
No, they work on the buddy system, so I can only exchange ideas and talk to Barry. Now, this really interferes with science because science is based on free discussion. And ideally, you get a bunch of guys together, exchange ideas, work on problems, and that's how things move forward. But they're so over-the-top concerned about security, they split everything off, and everybody becomes stagnant. It just destroys any of the progress you can make, or at least makes it go so slow. I think they wind up shooting themselves in the foot.
And when you see this craft and you're inside, was there any indication that there was an area that they would use to control it, to pilot it? Was there a pilot seat? There were 3 seats. They sat around. The reactor was in the dead center of it. And then equidistant around there were 3 seats. That's all. There was a large, they're not consoles, they're large rectangular objects, also spaced equidistant around the center. There's nothing on them, there's no buttons, there's no lights, there's no controls. And they look the same color, the same
Everything
thing.
is the same color.
It's just a different shape.
Right. And directly underneath them, there's 3 levels in the craft. The main level is what we're talking about. Directly under that, those are the gravity amplifiers, the big rectangular objects. Underneath them are the gravity emitters that look like, for lack of a better word, a trash can hanging on a pipe. 3 of those. And then the top layer, this is just my personal belief, I think that has to do with a navigation or their version of a computer with some planar panels, sensor panels around the craft that we would call portholes, but they're not portholes, they're just black areas. And I think that just determines its, position in space. But I physically was in the center section, and I stuck my torso in the bottom section and hung upside down so I could see how the gravity amplifiers were positioned.
What is the roughly the size of this thing?
I don't remember from being there, but after all this stuff was over, I had John Andrews, a guy from the Testers Model Corporation, and we sat down and tried to figure out from what I saw and known sizes of things, and we came up with 52 feet in diameter. And
so
I think that's
fairly small.
Yeah, so I think that's a reasonable guess.
Now, you said there's 9 of them, and you got a brief glimpse at the other ones. How were they different?
Oh, they looked completely different. One looked like I called it Jell-O mold, and it looked like a classic Jell-O mold with the rippled sides to it. One was a very flat disc, like a straw hat or something like that. That was sitting up on its edge, and the thin part of it looked like a projectile had been fired through the edge of it. So I don't know if they were attempting to see if the metal could be penetrated, or if that's where the thing came from. Maybe it was shot down. But that was the only one where I saw there was, actual physical damage to it.
And that one was roughly the same size? They're all...
They were kind of too far away to tell.
And there was several teams that were working on the propulsion system, so there was different teams that were working on these different aircrafts?
I don't know. I could only assume.
Right. Now, when you're sitting in this thing and you're looking at this otherworldly craft, your goal is to try to figure out how this thing functions. Your goal is to try to figure out how this reactor... but you would imagine they would give you more time than just one day to check that out.
Oh, it wasn't one day.
Right.
Yeah, Barry was there. I think Barry was sleeping there. I'm sure they had... Now, that isn't weird. Up at the Tonopah test range where they work on stealth fighters, you go, I think, 3 weeks on, 1 week off, and you stay up there too. So it's not weird to stay up at the test site.
Right.
So, I think he pretty much... And he acted like he's been up there for a long time.
Yeah.
But...
Maybe he's still there.
Yeah, who knows?
Do you have contact with this guy?
No. Oh, no. I wish I did. I kind of thought he was going to come out after I did.
Right.
And I think I took so much flack and it's so much shit for what went on. I think I wound up helping security there, and everybody became afraid of, doing or saying anything after that.
So what kind of reports did you have to give? So you're not making much progress, right? You're just trying to figure out what this thing is, and it seems impossible.
Well, we didn't personally make them. We were always... There was never a lot of information that we gained. The guy, you would call him our supervisor, his name was Dennis Mariani, and kind of a military-looking guy. And he would routinely pop in, during the day and, hey, what's going on, guys? And he would essentially relay any information, anything new we came up with. He was our go-between, where we presented him the information, then he took it to wherever they were, assembling all the data from everybody.
Now, I assume you're working normal days, like an 8-hour day?
No.
No?
No, it was really weird that I would be only called in on certain times and certain days. And they would be weird hours, too. Most of the time was later in the evening. I can get a call at 11 o'clock at night, and they'll say, it's now 11 o'clock. By 11:45, you need to be at the McCarran terminal, and, we'll let you know when we have more information.
But what did you do while you were there? If you're looking at this object, this reactor, and you can't figure out what it is or how it works, other than the fact that it works on this element that we don't even know about.
Sure. The thing was what you do with anything. If you're trying to analyze it, all you can do is perform tests. And all we did is try and come up with every kind of test we possibly could. We tested, it violated a lot of what we thought was impossible to violate. One of the first laws of thermodynamics, essentially any machine, any device that operates always makes extra heat. Nothing works at 100% efficient. Even the headphones you're wearing, anything that takes power, some of that power is going to be converted to heat, and it's just wasted. This didn't. We looked at, back then we had infrared cameras. They're different today, but back then you had to pour liquid nitrogen into the camera to cool the sensor down and get these infrared images you've seen. But it never got, no matter what the load was on the reactor, it never got above the ambient temperature, which is impossible. You're, pulling out huge amounts of power and nothing ever gets warm. We tried measuring magnetic fields and there was nothing there. So we started playing around with the emission from the emitters, the gravity wave itself, and saw what we could do with it and how it was focused. So we really spent all our time just trying to see what the stuff can do and what we can control.
So you were seeing what it could do, but you couldn't ever figure out how it was doing it.
No, not really. We really could only use come up with a best guess. Now, I can't say we really that I could absolutely state for certainty how anything actually worked.
Now, how did you know at all how they were piloting it? Because they were doing some tests where they were having these things fly around in the sky, and this is what gets us deeper into your story.
Right. I was out there for one test. Right. In fact, I was with Barry in the lab, and Dennis came in and said, "We're about to run a test. Why don't you guys come out?" Or I think he said, "Barry, why don't you come out here and bring Bob with you?" We went out there, and the craft was already outside the hangar and was just preparing to lift off. Now, they were in communication with somebody in the craft.
So there was a person in the craft.
Yeah, there was certainly a person in there. Now, it's not a comfortable place to be in because it's small. So the guy has to be sitting on the floor in the middle, my best guess.
And this is the same specific craft that you worked on? Because that was the only craft that you were in.
The only one that I touched and worked on. And it quietly lifted off the ground, which was incredibly impressive to see.
Quietly or silently?
Well, quietly, because it
make some sort of a noise?
It produced a little corona discharge from the bottom. A corona discharge is kind of a high voltage brush, little bluish glow discharge. As it was lifting off the ground, you can hear a slight hiss sound. Now, as soon as it cleared the ground by about 5 or 10 feet, maybe even less than that, the hissing stopped and the blue glow disappeared. So it lifted off quietly, and then it hovered silently, if you want to be specific.
Wow. So then what kind of maneuvers was it doing?
It took off, for that particular time, it took off, moved a little around to the left and right, and then sat back down. The craft itself, they communicated with it with because I saw the guy talking in a regular VHF radio to the person in the craft. And I even saw the frequency that was on the frequency counter of the communication, the transceiver there. But what's weird is he shouldn't be able to communicate with the craft with a radio. The radio wave should bend around the craft. I mean, it shouldn't be possible. Every single thing about the craft and the way they operated didn't make any sense to us. I mean, that's something we talked about for a while after.
Why should the frequency bend around the craft?
Well, you really have to look at the way the gravity wave comes out of the craft. There's the reactor's in the center, and there's a waveguide that goes up to the top. There's actually a small appendage that sticks out of the top of the craft, and it produces a heart-shaped gravitational distortion around the craft. Now, if the craft is sitting in the air and you walk underneath it and look up, you actually cannot see the craft. The light bends around it. You're bending gravity, bends light. It bends radio waves. It shouldn't be possible to communicate with a craft that has an envelope around it that's distorting all forms of energy. But they were apparently in contact with it.
Somehow or another, through some unexplained way that they didn't bother explaining to you. Mm-hmm. So this thing gets up, it just does some very simple maneuvers, left, right, goes down. And did they discuss this with you? I mean, they said they wanted you to see it.
No, they just wanted, they didn't discuss anything with me. It sat down, we looked around for a bit, and Barry said, let's go back. We went back in the lab. All we got to do was see it. Fast forward to some months later, I did have the test flight schedule of the craft. Now, they had times they had designated high-performance tests. This obviously wasn't one that was a high-performance test. The high-performance test goes above the mountain range, and they do much more radical moves with the thing. Look, this is a prized item, and they're not doing anything like taking it out of the atmosphere or flying around to other countries or anything like that. They just play with this thing right over the test site. But they were doing some radical moves with it. And since I had the test flight schedule, statistically, the amount of traffic in the surrounding areas on the highway was lowest on Wednesdays. And that's why Dennis told us that all the test flights occurred only on Wednesdays. because it'd be the least chance that anyone would see what's going on.
And this was before the government had expanded the forbidden territory around Area 51 and Papoose Lake and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, I think that occurred after my story came out. Then people started going up on the mountaintops and trying to look down into there, and they kind of freaked out and then did the land grab and pushed everybody back. But yeah, I think all that occurred long after that I came out.
So you're working there, and while you're working there, you're under this crazy schedule. Forgive me for explaining your story, but you would get these phone calls. You would have to go to the airport at 11 p.m., and your wife started thinking that you were having an affair.
Yeah, apparently so. Now, I did give my permission to have, as part of the, security clearance process, I gave written permission to have the phones monitored and things of that sort. So they weren't doing any covert stuff. They, with any Q clearance, which is civilian top secret clearance or military top secret clearance, they go talk to friends and, places you've been, make sure you're not connected to foreign countries. But, monitoring your phone is nothing unusual. However, they insisted that, you don't even talk to your loved one, to your partner, to your wife, whatever, about what's going on. So she was essentially in the dark and didn't know the phone was being monitored. Well, part of the security clearance is that not only do you not have any connections to foreign countries and aren't a maniac, but you have to have a stable home life too. Well, she started having an affair with a flight instructor. Now, they were monitoring this on the phone, and they knew it, and I didn't. So they stopped me coming in, and their attitude at the time was, we need to see how this is going to play out, and if Lazar is going to get a little weird or anything. So let's just, hold him off from coming in and, see what happens.
And they explained this to you, what was happening?
Well, after the fact, yeah, because time kind of went on, and there were guys that were following me around, and I started getting a little concerned, going, well, shit, are they booting me out of the project? And if so, they're not just going to let me hang out at home and go get a new job knowing what I know. So as time went on, I started getting a little concerned, and I took my closest friends and just kind of got together, and I said, hey, remember that job I told you about? This is what's going on. And you don't need to take my word for it. Wednesday night, we need to all go out here. I want to show you what's going on. So I took everybody, and we went out to, remember, since I had the test flight schedule, and went outside the base, out into the desert, and so everybody could see, one of the high-performance tests. And, it left quite an imprint. So this became a thing to do. And I think it was on the third time that we got caught. I mean, we started becoming a little careless. We went out there, and my friend Gene Huff and I were leaning on the front of a vehicle, and just for some reason, we just started talking shit. Something about attacking the base or something along those lines. Then about 20 feet in front of us, we see a little green light fall on the ground and roll to us. And unbeknownst to us, now it's pitch black, you can't see your hand in front of your face. There were a bunch of guards standing right out there, and they had a night vision scope where they were like from here to the wall looking at us, listening to us, and the guy dropped it, and the scope rolled over to us, and you could see the green screen, turn the lights on, and all these guys are there. So it was...
Whoa. When they catch you and they bring you in, then what happens?
Well, I went in for debriefing, and this is when they brought out the transcript of the phone call with my wife. And, they sat me down and we said, when we meant to keep the secret, we meant you can't tell your friends, right? And it just being sarcastic and trying to. Mm-hmm. And then they got real serious. But this is where they, took the transcript out and were reading me what my wife and, our friend were talking about. And I don't know, it was a hard time.
So what happens from there?
I'm not sure exactly they knew what to do, but they did let me go that night, and I went home. And this is kind of when the most stressful part started.
Because you're realizing that you're being monitored.
Yeah,
24/7.
now I know not only am I being monitored, but now I know I'm in trouble.
So they still have these things, supposedly.
I would guess. I mean, I don't have any information on that.
Have you ever asked anyone that has any inkling of any idea of where they got them or how they got them?
No, but something must have been said to me from Barry, but it was just too long ago, and I can't quite remember what was said, but it just left a seed in my mind. I think at least one of them was part of an archaeological dig. So it's old. At least one of them is old. I don't know if it was the one I worked on, but I remember something to do with an archaeological dig.
Whoa.
So that means it's not just old, it's ancient.